Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're really excited to have all of you here today for today's foreign policy virtual dialogue, exploring the unparalleled growth and innovation in the agriculture sector. I apologize here. I think I am on mute, guys. Am I still on mute? Can you hear me? Let me see here.
You're fine.
I am okay. You can hear me. Okay, great. Perfect. I want to thank everyone for joining us. And as I mentioned, we're here to talk about agriculture technology. It's actually the third in a series of dialogues we're hosting in partnership with the Embassy, the United Arab Emirates Embassy in Washington, D.C. And we're highlighting the interconnected challenges of climate change, of food and water security, and exploring the international partnerships with innovation that are really providing solutions. We're hoping to look at the solutions today. My name is Rena Ninen. It is my pleasure to be your host this morning. You know, the impacts of climate change are being felt everywhere globally. There's extreme temperatures, unprecedented weather events, wiping out crops, threatening lives and even livelihoods of farmers. As unveiled during COP26, the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate Innovation Initiative seeks to really tackle these challenges. They're looking at funding innovators, startups to try and reshape the future of food. So how can new technologies and innovative policies really enable producers to adapt production methods, secure supply chains, and feed the world more sustainably? These are some of the questions we're hoping to tackle today. And we're grateful that all of you guys could join us for this virtual conversation. A very big thank you to the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates in DC for helping us make this event possible. But before we get started, I want to just run through some housekeeping things. You can all hear me now, but we want to also make sure that you know of some of the things that happen typically here in Zooms. We've reserved a portion here of this event for your questions, and you can submit them at any point. You're familiar with the Q&A button below. You can go ahead and submit your questions there, and be sure to tell us your name, your organization, where you're writing in from. And also, if you're joining us by phone or watching the live stream, you can email us your questions. That address is events@foreignpolicy.com. That's events.foreignpolicy.com. And of course, we want to hear from you on social media. We hope to have this conversation. Be sure to use the hashtag #GlobalAgTech. That's #GlobalAgTech, so we can get that conversation started online as well. Well, I'm delighted now to start our program with two companies on the cutting edge of farming, agriculture, supply chain, and technology. These companies were actually finalists in the UAE Food Tech Challenge in 2020. Very pleased to welcome Barak Karpinar, founder and managing director of QS Monitor. QS Monitor is a tech company using AI and risk models to improve efficiency and sustainability across food supply chains. I'm also joined by Mark Tester, co-founder and chief scientist at Red Sea Farms. That's a company looking to reduce the carbon and water footprint of our food sector. They're designing and delivering sustainable agriculture technologies for really harsh environments. I can't wait to get into that with Mark as well. I want to thank you, gentlemen, both of you, for joining us. Mark, as we'll see in a moment, Mark is joining us from an international airport. Grateful that he could make it. Travel delays, so we're grateful Mark will be joining us from there as well. But I want to sort of kick it off and ask you, gentlemen, if you can give us a sense of maybe the elevator pitch of your company's technology, how your company is looking to transform agriculture and contribute to greater sustainability. Mark, why don't we start with you?
Thank you very much. And you introduced it so well. You've made my job easy. The world needs to improve the sustainability of the food sector. This isn't for discussion. And in particular, we need to reduce the water footprint of our food. 3/4 of all the water humans use is for agriculture, for putting the food on our plates. And anything we can do to reduce the pressure on our precious freshwater reserves is going to be very valuable. And for us at Red Sea Farms, we're trying to reduce the water footprint by substituting as much fresh water as possible with salt water. To grow plants, we need water. This is also, it's physics. But if we can use saltier water or other water reserves that we currently do not use for agricultural production and substitute with the fresh water that we would normally use, that's reducing the pressure on our freshwater reserves. And we use a range of technologies, information technologies, engineering technologies, and plant science technologies as well.
I can't wait to get into that more about water and sort of the limited resources of water, particularly in the Middle East. But Barak, I want to turn to you as well, how you can tell us about what your company is doing and how they're using technology.
Thank you very much, Rina. As you know, food supply chain is a very complex ecosystem. There are lots of parties and stakeholders involved, the government, private sector, sometimes NGOs and institutes. And the ingredients that when you are growing produce or have a livestock, you have lots of parties that you're dealing with. And the supply chain itself, from growing until it reaches to the plate of the consumer, there are lots of factors that might affect the quality of the food, the contamination of the food waste throughout this process. We are focusing on AI, how we can capture the data and analyze this, where this risks and contaminations are coming from. That's why how we are losing food that is not healthy for the consumers that comes to their plate. So we have to collaborate with the private sector, public sector, governments, and institutions, so we can share this data and we can give a better feedback to the producers, farmers, and anyone that is within the supply chain, so they can take the necessary actions through this process.
I want to ask both of you this next question. Barak, I'm going to start with you though. What do you feel like you're learning project-wise at the local sector that you feel could potentially be scaled and offered globally in this AgTech sector that could make a difference in sustainability?
Well, thank you. I mean, there are lots of parameters that we have to basically understand and focus on. First of all, we need to understand the nutritional factor and how this applies for different types of consumers, because when you look from a global perspective, the consumers have different appetites, different cultural requirements and needs. And also, you need to understand the quality and the infrastructure of different parts of the world so that you can really analyze how this data applies. We are coming from Abu Dhabi, we are based in UAE, and we are focusing on mostly the problems of this region, but it is very well connected with the rest of the world, either from the input perspective or from the export perspective even. And then we have lots of learnings that we see that we can export to different parts of the world. Like there are some products that are specific to this region, like dates. And dates is something very interesting for the consumers from many perspectives. It's a nutritional product. It can be used for different purposes. And just working along the supply chain of dates, you learn a lot in terms of where are the risks are coming from, how you can efficiently manage the supply chain, and how you can offer nutritional and sufficient food for the consumers.
That's really interesting about dates. I want to turn to you, Mark. What do you feel like you're seeing from a local perspective that could be scaled globally?
We're very lucky to be establishing in the Middle East, where we have a fairly nascent local food production system, certainly for the higher quality produce. And we're able to develop our technologies, our engineering technologies and our IT technologies. We can develop them here in the Middle East, improve them by growing produce and selling produce into this nascent market. So we're able to provide a competitive edge and build a business using this. But the primary purpose really is to test our technologies, improve our technologies, and then demonstrate that they actually work in the real marketplace, in the teeth of the harsh conditions that we endure here. And that enables us to demonstrate to future customers and investors that what we've got is not just talk and not just new technologies being rolled out, but new technologies that actually work. So it's fantastic to be here, being able to develop these technologies and roll them out to anywhere where there's a water-stressed environment. And this is global. It can even be in the tropics, such as Singapore, all the way through to obvious places like the southwest of the US and northern Mexico. So I think we're able to really improve our technologies and our abilities to package and and commercialize our technologies here, ready for a global market. We're actually already starting in North America, so we already have our first demonstration facility in Arizona.
We're already getting we're getting tons of questions, and so thank you guys. Please keep your questions coming in the Q&A button there. This one's from Jason Dubau from Maryland Department of Planning. What do you think the impacts upon fish and other aquatic organisms from using salt water? Barak, do you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, it's a very specific area for the aquaculture, but when we are looking from the risk perspective and different parts of the world, we see different types of risks in the ecosystem of the oceans or the sea. So when you go to Southeast Asia, you are looking more into things like heavy metals or toxins. But when you're going to Pacific, you're looking different types of risks that are coming from either the weather conditions or the type of fish that you're having. So we don't see much changes from that perspective, but the pollution that is caused for different industrial reasons or environmental factors are becoming a big issue for certain parts of the world when it comes to the oceans. And we are seeing more and more production towards the fish farming industries, which seems more sustainable compared to the oceans, which is kind of concerning. But I don't have personally a deep down understanding of where it's exactly coming from, but we see it from a risk perspective and from a consumer perspective. Some parts of the world are giving some alarms, and we have to be cautious with that. So if we are trying to keep a sustainable aquaculture, we need to be concerned about these risks, and we need to take some preventive actions as the government or the private sector.
Mark, I'm curious, how can you take these technologies and enable food growth when you're operating under really harsh environments? How do you strengthen food security there?
Food security in a broader sense needs to be achieved through a balance of diverse importation, high quality food chain storage and control, and of course as much local production as makes sense. And by making sense, I mean making both environmental sense and is economically viable. So when we're in the harsh environments, really we should be developing systems for safe importation of and storage of the commodity crops, the starch-based cereals, even potatoes can be stored for very long times. But the fresh fruits and vegetables, we really do need to develop systems for their local production. And when we're in a harsh environment, or water-limited environment in particular, we have to develop systems which minimize the use of the water. In this region, 1 kilogram of tomatoes takes about 350 liters of water to produce. And we need to reduce that very clearly, and using, for example, controlled environment systems and systems where we're substituting salt water, in replacing fresh water with salt water, we're really able to massively reduce that water footprint. So from 350 liters for a kilogram of tomatoes, that can go down to about 20 liters. And that's done by using a combination of technologies. I love Barak with his emphasis, with his use of IT. This is absolutely central, and it's central all the way through the food production system and can make big and significant contributions. And for my plant science, we're developing the varieties of plants which are better able to grow on the saline environments. For example, for tomatoes, we can grow them on brackish water because of the rootstocks that we've developed to help the plants use less fresh water and grow better on salty water. So there's a range of biological technologies and information technologies that really we can roll out and try to reduce that water footprint.
Water is such a huge and important topic. Mark, I know it's a big focus of what you're also doing. Barak, I want to ask you a little bit about using data and AI to improve production efficiency. What have you seen in this sector that's working and that shows promise?
Well, I mean, we see more and more data sharing between the stakeholders, which was not the case in the past. And we see more data sharing between the governments and private and public sector to solve the same issue, basically, how they can improve the quality of the product, how they can minimize the food waste through the supply chain, and where it's exactly coming from. So this is actually very promising. And also the producers are trying to learn the better ways of producing their product, because when the supply chains were broken, everybody was affected. It's not only about the consumer issue, it's also the producer's issue. They want to go to be able to go to different markets, different consumers, or to be able to reach to different traders. And in this case, they were having some challenges and issues about the compliance and the different types of regulations, different types of certifications or risks that are being checked in different parts of the world. So this became like a big bottleneck for everybody. And we have seen a good feedback mechanism between the producers and the traders and the consumers, which helped us a lot. And we try to address certain micro problems, and we try to duplicate these. For example, when we look at a smaller microclimate in India, and we learn from it that there are certain risks that are emerging from either the weather conditions or a certain threat that's coming from pollution, then from the learnings that we have there, we can actually duplicate and solve another problem in different parts of the world. So we give this feedback to the producers and the traders on a daily basis, so they can take necessary actions, so we have less food wasted in the whole supply chain.
That's terrific. We've got one question here from Chris Balargian. Mark, I'm going to toss this to you. What kinds of hybrid technologies are being utilized to improve the carbon footprint, such as hydroponic vertical growth farms or water derived from solar sourced collection from atmospheric conditions? Are these sustainable?
I think some of these technologies are very attractive, and maybe in the future they may become economically viable. At the moment, things like vertical farms really are very specialized and really are not making quantitatively significant contributions to real food security. Likewise, water capture from air, you're fighting against some pretty big thermodynamic problems there, and really is only going to be viable thermodynamically, energetically, when you're in a highly humid atmosphere, such as the air coming out of a greenhouse. So when you're capturing the air there, we can actually recirculate the water from that air because it's very humid. But in normal air, the air capture is really, it's really only viable for extreme circumstances, such as providing water in refugee camps or very remote locations. Yeah.
Mark Kester of Red Sea Farms and Barak Karpinar of QS Monitor. I want to thank both of you gentlemen for joining us. Mark, grateful that you were able to join us before you catch that flight. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, as you just heard, the AgTech industry is helping to tackle some of the toughest challenges facing the industry. This is amid a changing climate. And as you see these climate pressures continuing to mount, we're trying to identify strategies to fund, deploy, scale a range of innovations that'll be really important to ensuring food security in countries around the world. So today, we've got another panel here today to look at the public and private sectors, how they're working together to address resource shortages. How do you support the agriculture sector, and how do you meet the growing demand more sustainably? We're going to look at that, but before I introduce our panelists, I want to remind you can continue to submit your Q&A. We've got tons of great questions already pouring in. There's a Q&A button, or you can also tweet them, #GlobalAgTech. Well, I want to introduce our next panel. Joining us now, Dr. Jewel Brenna, who is the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture with USDA, is with us. Grateful to have you joining us. I'm also joined by Danielle Nierenberg. Danielle Nierenberg. I think I got that right, Danielle. She's president of Food Tank. Food Tank brings together top researchers and thought leaders to address all sides of food issues. Danielle is joining us from South by Southwest, where she's looking forward to be on the future of food and discuss that further. And we're also joined by Fatima Al-Mula, Director of Partnerships and Special Projects at UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. Fatima works in the ministry to really help partnerships address climate change and elevate innovative R&D efforts across the UAE and addressing food security and also expanding food access. So welcome to all of you. So grateful you guys could join us. One of the things I want to ask you about is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a report that actually noted the shocking statistic: 8% of today's farmland will become climatically unsuitable. Can't farm that land by 2050. How do you think AgTech can help address these dire predictions? Fatima, can we start with you?
Yes, thanks so much, Reina. Salam alaikum, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Like you said, Reina, the latest IPCC report really highlights that humans and nature are really being pushed beyond their abilities to adapt. And it also indicates that widespread damage is already happening and that we have a very narrow window to act. So whether extremes are worsening food and water security and vulnerable communities will be disproportionately affected. Like you mentioned, the global warming reaches, as you pointed out, the global warming reaches 1.5 degrees Celsius, and up to 8% of the world's farmlands could become unsuitable for growing food by mid-century. And this comes against, of course, the backdrop of rapidly growing populations. And around the world, we could experience more crop failures and farmlands not being able to grow crops with the same level of efficiency and effectiveness. And it will expose millions of people to acute food and water insecurity, and also have devastating impacts on the smallholder farmers who actually grow 1/3 of the world's food. So how we use our land affects the climate, and the changes in the climate affect how we use our land. And at the same time, agriculture is a sector that is intrinsically linked to the climate change, both in terms of being impacted by climate change, but also as a source of the solutions. So AgTech can definitely help to address climate change, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation. For instance, when you look at remote imaging technologies that use drones, satellites, and sensors that could help farmers measure the amount of carbon that is being stored in their soils. When we look at adaptation, AgTech has a crucial role to play when it comes to making agriculture more resilient to a changing climate.
Yeah, that is a big issue, getting people that sort of resource and opportunity and ability. I want to touch on that for just a second. I want to ask Danielle Nierenberg, when we look at COP26, the commitments that are in COP26, how do we hold people accountable?
I mean, it's such a good question. How do we hold these stakeholders accountable to all of the incredible commitments they made? I mean, we have 100 months to change, the course of history and solve the climate crisis. So I think looking forward, we need to not only hold countries accountable, but what you mentioned before, Rena, is very important, involving the private sector. The companies that we just saw speak are an incredible part of the solution to solving the climate crisis. They need more investment, for sure, but they also need more commitment from government so that they can thrive and survive in places like UAE, in places like Arizona, in places like Sub-Saharan Africa. So there's a lot of collaboration that I think is necessary, a lot of partnership, and a lot of new ideas needed moving forward. But what I want everyone to come away with from this conversation is the urgency. We can't make commitments for 2025 or 2030. We need to start these collaborations and these partnerships now so that they can really make the change that we need.
Dr. Bernal, I want to bring you in on this conversation as well. How could you explain how the US government is working with the private sector to try and deploy advanced agriculture technologies in the US and around the world?
Great question. Thank you, Reina, and happy to be here. Since President Biden's Climate Leaders Summit in April 2021, USDA has launched initiatives to help build the resilience, enhance food and nutrition security, sustainability, increase productivity, and really support equity and rural livelihoods, all while we're trying to reduce the environmental and climate impacts. And these initiatives include partnerships for climate smart commodities, Aim for Climate, and the Coalition on Sustainable Productivity Growth. We call it the SPG Coalition, and really talking about these important initiatives, each which have key links to the private sector. So when we think about the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, we're really excited about that. On February 7th, we announced a $1 billion investment in partnerships to support America's climate smart farmers, ranchers, and forest land owners through this new USDA initiative. And the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities will finance the production of climate smart commodities through a series of partner-led pilots and demonstration projects. And this effort is going to finance the next steps necessary to cost effectively measure and validate the greenhouse gas benefits from those practices. And a key component to these is partnerships. So eligible partners include a wide range of public and private entities, such as farm groups, states, nonprofits, businesses, tribal governments, and higher ed institutions. And so we're committed to equity in this program delivery, and we want to ensure that all projects provide direct and meaningful benefits to a representative cross-section of production agriculture that includes small and historically underserved producers. Aim for Climate is another opportunity for private sector engagement through our Aim for Climate innovation sprints. And just so you know, an innovation sprint is an increase in investment from non-governmental partners to help achieve specific measurable outcomes in agriculture innovation for climate smart agriculture. And the innovation sprints are encouraged to be bold, ambitious, and completed in an expedited time frame. So in preparation for COP27, Aim for Climate has identified 4 innovation sprints and focal areas to feature at COP27. And these focal areas include smallholder farmers in low and middle income countries, methane reduction, emerging technologies, and agroecological research. And Aim for Climate welcomes innovation sprint proposals from a perspective of current partners as we look forward to announcing additional sprints at COP27. And I encourage all of you to visit www.aimforclimate.org for additional information. And finally, the SPG Coalition that we launched at the UN Food Systems Summit in September aims to accelerate the transition to more sustainable food systems by producing more in a way that optimizes agricultural sustainability across social, economic, and environmental dimensions. And this coalition holds the key to meeting our food and nutrition needs while also conserving natural resources. And the coalition really takes a holistic approach to productivity growth. And so we currently have nearly 90 members from academia, from research institutions, and private sector, and countries from around the world who have joined together to share best practices and innovations, to identify knowledge gaps and collaborative opportunities, and disseminate information on innovative science-based approaches for sustainable productivity growth. And we need the partnership with everyone, including our private sector, to make all of these happen. So we look forward to everyone's engagement.
That, partnership is so important, but also sometimes there's this thought about having new technologies that sometimes don't work for farmers. Fatima, I want to toss you this question from the audience from Gari Miripuri, who says micro and smallholder farmers in Asia and Africa, how do they get access to any of this technology or other research breakthroughs?
So that's a really good question, Rena. And I will also touch upon the Aim for Climate initiative that Dr. Jewel mentioned, which really is a platform for everybody to be able to join to address food security challenges. And like Dr. Jewel mentioned, there are 4 areas that Aim4C is currently focusing on, and through innovation sprints and through partnerships with governments, we want to make sure that we have an inclusive platform that gives everybody the opportunity to be able to join in on the initiative to benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. I want to turn to you, Danielle, and just ask you a little bit about, a lot of times these technologies that we're seeing are terrific, but they aren't really part of helping the farmers in the field. Have you seen that? What's been your experience, and what do you make of it?
Yeah, and I think it's such a good question. Often you see technologies that are developed and by, white folks in lab coats and business suits who don't understand the real challenges that farmers face every day in fields, or that farm workers face every day in fields. And what I would like to see, and what I know, our panelists would like to see, is more participatory development of new technologies and new innovations that build on what farmers already know. Farmers are the smartest people I've ever met. I've spent a lot of time in the field all over the world and in the United States. Farmers know what works and what doesn't. What they need is more investment and more capital behind them. And what they need is that participation. They need to be part of what happens when new technologies are developed. And I think that's a really key part of this. What we've seen over the last 50 years is farmers being told what they need instead of being asked what they want. That needs to change if we are going to solve the climate crisis again in the next 100 months. We have so little time here, but there's so much opportunity. There's so much, I think, momentum. COP27 is such a great place to bring all of these ideas together. We already see a lot of organizations encouraging a food and agriculture day, a food and agriculture pavilion at COP27. I'm very excited and hopeful that we really turn things around and make sure that farmers are part of the process every step of the way.
Yeah, that's so important, and a great point that you mentioned. Dr. Bernal, I want to ask you a little bit about COVID and this time period. What have you found are really key policies that have helped farmers during the pandemic? How do you think these policies and programs might continue to aid the agriculture development?
Honestly, we learned a lot during COVID, and I think really understanding the support we've needed to provide for farmers in terms of the supply chain has been really critical. We looked at what things that we needed to do to ensure that we could keep food moving during the pandemic. So really focusing resources on one, providing critical pandemic assistance to producers during the COVID situation. We allocated $11 billion of assistance directly to producers in food and ag businesses to help these sectors get back on track and plan for the future. And it provided a way to really get resources more equitably for more opportunities for our farmers, ranchers, and producers. And it will serve and continue to serve as a bridge from the disruptions to the supply chain that were associated with the pandemic, and make longer term investments to help build back a better food system. So, we're also expanding the reach to conservation. We're leveraging crop insurance to help promote good farming practices like planting cover crops. For example, we're holding our second sign up for the pandemic cover crop program, which provides a premium benefit or a discount for producers with insurance who plant cover crops. And we're providing a tool to help producers maintain cover crop systems amid the pandemic. So we're really looking at not only how to provide critical assistance, but we're looking at how to focus on, local and regional processing capacity and really trying to strengthen production all along the supply chain to ensure that our farmers and ranchers and forest landowners get that support that they need to carry them through what has been a tough couple of years regarding the pandemic and its impacts.
It really has been a tough couple of years, and the implementation of technology is also another added layer that everyone's looking at this point. I want to also turn to Fatima to ask you this question from Derek Economy from USDA, asking, what's the role of energy in boosting climate smart agriculture to achieve food security?
That's a good question. I think energy plays a really important part when it comes to agriculture productivity, especially with countries like the UAE. For example, we're a country that faces harsh climate, really below average rainfall, and less than 5% of our land is arable. So we are a country, and like in other countries as well that face similar characteristics, have to turn to technology and have to turn to research and development and innovation in order to produce food. Here we look at hydroponics, aeroponics, controlled environment agriculture, and all of those can be very energy intensive. And I think that this is where looking at renewable energy, for example, will support in transitioning towards more sustainable practices for agriculture practices.
I want to also turn, Danny, to ask you this question. about improving climate change resilience. How do we get there? What do you feel is really working? And when you look out in the food sector, what stands out to you at this point, looking at this type of technology and innovation?
Absolutely. I think the Deputy Secretary brought up something earlier that is very key, that diversity is important. Diversity in who we're supporting as farmers, as entrepreneurs, as innovators, diversity in the kinds of crops that we're growing, more resilient crops. She talked about cover crops. These can be used in a variety of ways. You know, they're preventing soil erosion, but that you also have a lot of private sector folks interested in them because they can be used in snacks and breads and all of these other food products. So I think really looking at diversity along our entire food system, that's what's going to create the resilience to climate change. Investing in BIPOC farmers here in the United States, investing in entrepreneurs who, you know, might not have gotten the investment that they've needed in the past, investing in mission-led startups like the companies we heard from before who really want to change the food system for the better. That's where we're going to see the real change. But again, I want to get back to the urgency. We need to do these things yesterday. And that's what I think we all are beginning to understand. And I hope that comes clear, not just at COP27, but all of the international forums where we talk about the climate crisis.
Dr. Bernard, Danny mentions the need to bring other people to the table. I mean, you know that personally, you've also traveled and met a lot of these farmers. We've got a question here from Saptak Banerjee saying, how do we get low-income farmers to realize the environment is a significant concern, especially when financial constraints tie them to one point perspective of sorts? I mean, we often don't have this dialogue that the finances of a farmer maybe starting off or who might not have a ton of money factors into us moving forward on technology or other sustainability projects.
Yeah, I think one thing that we have to have a really honest conversation about is, you know, as we think about technology and, you know, we think about the affordability of technology to make it applicable to farmers of all shapes and sizes. We really need to, so we look at the science of how we utilize technology and implement technology. We have to really consider ways to focus on scaling it, to make it useful and making it affordable. And that is something that, you know, I have worked with smaller farmers in the past. I've worked with underserved farmers in the past. They want to implement these tools. And so, you know, we need to think carefully, one, about how we do the science and also how we educate them in the use of these tools so that everyone can fully participate in the work that we're doing. Because by and large, our farmers want to do this work. They want to really utilize the technologies to focus on addressing our food needs, preparing, taking care of our environment and doing all of this work. We need everyone at the table. And so we need to provide the tools and resources to ensure that everyone can be at the table.
It's very important and an important discussion to have. Fatma, I want to ask you, I want to get back to COP26 for a second and ask you about the commitments related to fund allocations, targeting how do you strengthen food systems and food security? What do you think works in really connecting those dots and using the funding to help these systems?
I think agriculture and food systems are part of the climate challenge, but often, unfortunately, overlooked when it comes to the global climate dialogues. And food systems do account for a third of greenhouse gas emissions. So we really need to capture these opportunities in agriculture and food systems through partnerships and collaborations with other countries. Like Dr. Jewel mentioned, I think a great example here is the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, which is really putting pressure on governments to say, hey, we're serious, we're here, and we would like to encourage people, organizations to join us to increase their investments in climate smart agriculture, but also create a pathway to make sure this is inclusive for not just countries, but everybody who needs them as well. And I think what was great as well during the first Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate Ministerial is that at COP21, we announced a $4 billion investment. And at the ministerial meeting, we have now increased our ambition to double these investments to $8 billion by COP27 this year. So that's something that is really ambitious for us to achieve by COP27.
Secretary Bernard, I want to ask you, we've got a question from Claire Hickson asking about the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate. It's a as you mentioned, a new major initiative for promoting global cooperation on innovation in food systems. So given African countries' agriculture sectors are among those who are most vulnerable to climate change, what plans does the US and UAE as co-chairs have to engage more African countries in the initiative ahead of COP27?
Rain, I'm really glad that you asked this question. We are excited about opportunities to engage African countries. We need all voices participating in AIM for Climate, and we really welcome and encourage African countries to reach out to discuss joining AIM for Climate. And one of the focal areas of the 2022 AIM for Climate innovation sprints that I talked about earlier is smallholder farmers in low and middle income countries. We must identify climate smart agricultural solutions that will benefit this target group specifically. And climate change is rapidly upending the landscape for smallholder agriculture, including both the crops and the livestock that they depend on. So without investment in innovations in climate smart solutions to support agricultural adaptation, 37 million additional people in sub-Saharan Africa and 78 million additional people worldwide are predicted to face chronic hunger by 2050. And it's just really sobering to think about those statistics. But with targeted investments in research, the tools smallholder farmers need to adapt and build resilient livelihoods, those can be developed in time to avert a catastrophe. And given that how we typically do business is unlikely to deliver the needed breakthroughs at the scale and speed that climate adaptation demands, highly innovative or moonshot approaches are needed in tandem with what we know is tried and true and works in terms of scientific research. So the AIM for Climate Innovation Sprint process really is a promising strategy, we feel, to foster breakthrough innovation. And it's a useful approach for focusing proposals on approaches to ensure we have innovative problem solving that can be tailored to specific preferred outputs, milestones, and time-bound delivery. So, we are very excited, again, to be able to partner and engage African countries, and we look forward to these opportunities to work together.
Yeah, trying to bring people to the table that might not necessarily have a chance or a shot. Danny, I know this is something that's passionate, close to your heart. We're getting so many questions here. I want to touch on this. The issue of smaller farms versus larger cooperative farms. How do these smaller farms access funds, access grants? How can they get access to technology? Danny, what are you seeing that's working in bringing in these people from the outside in?
Absolutely. It's such a good question. It goes back to that participatory nature of investment in agriculture that we need. We need farmers at the table from the very beginning. One really interesting example that I love is the Alliance for Biodiversity in SIA. That's the Center for Tropical Agriculture based in Colombia. They're working directly with farming communities to understand how climate change is affecting farmers, not just in Colombia, but all over the world. They're working with them to, do soil monitoring, to access weather data, to help them predict pests and disease, and then using that data, making it available to farmers, making it available to others who can learn from it, so that there's no issues around privacy. These are the kinds of collaborations that are needed. We need to scale them up. We need to scale them up quickly. Farmers need all the access to resources, whether it's really high tech technology or low tech technology. I think we forget that farmers, again, are very knowledgeable. And if we can combine their traditional practices and their cultural practices with some of these innovations, whether it's using their cell phone to predict, a pest disease, like I mentioned before, or do something else, then those are the kinds of innovations that are going to work for them the best. And especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa, where the Deputy Secretary mentioned that she wants to really ramp up, their involvement. Farmers all over the world are facing extreme challenges, but as Fatima said before, one of the biggest solutions to the climate crisis is farmers and the regenerative practices that they can take on now to really make a difference. So again, we need to bring everyone to the table. We need more women farmers at the table. We need more young farmers at the table. This is a really exciting opportunity. I know that these conversations often turn to doom and gloom, but we have a real opportunity here to make the agriculture sector something so wonderful that people want to get into it because it's intellectually stimulating, that they they feel like they're making a difference. So I'm excited about all of these things that are happening in the ag tech sector.
I can see your passion, Danny, and I understand just why you feel so strongly about making sure there is more representation at the table. Fatima, I want to ask you a little bit about governments. What can governments do to work multilaterally when creating these policies to support systems to really aid in food scarcity and reducing food scarcity?
I think our food systems, what we need to understand how interconnected the global web is, and what happens in one country and one region will have a domino effect for the rest of the world. And collectively, we all need to enhance the food security and ensure that the growing global population has continuous access to safe food. So for example, here in the UAE, one of the first things that we did when we had our first Minister of State for Food Security appointed is we developed a national food security strategy that brought together everyone from the private sector and everyone from the public sector and said, hey, what are the challenges that you're facing, and how can we address this? And even looking beyond our borders, like, we recognize the importance of partnerships and collaborations to work towards collective goals, because it's not a one size fits all. What works here will not work in another country. I think what we need to understand is, yes, can we transfer that technology to another country, but how can we work with farmers and people on the ground to make sure we understand the geographical differences and characteristics of implementing different climate smart technologies or different types of agricultural methods in those countries.
Dr. Bernal, I want to ask you this question sort of about the policies you're seeing. You've come in to the Agriculture Department with fresh eyes and also in the middle of a pandemic. What are you most hopeful for, especially as we're trying to emerge out of this pandemic? What do you believe in the ag tech sector that gives you the most hope in transforming agriculture?
We are really working hard to form alliances that advance mutual objectives that address, some of our challenges, including reducing food scarcity. And these challenges that our food systems face do not originate or end in any single country. So, we need to leverage the work and partnership of our international organizations, whether it's the FAO to help build more sustainable food systems, the World Food Program to provide school meals to children all over the world, the World Organization for Animal Health to combat animal diseases, or efforts to develop trade, facilitating science-based standards for food. This is really important. And another very important element is ensuring a trading system that allows the flow of agricultural products from new technologies, especially those that contribute to more nutritious foods, adaptation to climate change, and improve production for food security. So, as we coordinate among governments on food systems regulation, the adoption of international standards, and the approval of new technologies, it increases the predictability and transparency of food systems and ensures access of technologies and imports that can alleviate food scarcity. So, by working jointly with other countries on sustainable, innovative solutions to the challenges that our food system faces, we can really work together to reduce global food scarcity.
Danny, when you're looking at the food and ag sector, I mean, obviously there's costs and benefits. What are you seeing in that space that's working, especially when you weigh the two?
I think there's a lot that's really working. One company that I'm very excited about is Planet Forward, which is helping companies decarbonize their systems, and where they can't reduce carbon emissions, helping them find ways to do, to offset their carbon more efficiently. It's run by Julia Collins. I was just on a panel with her yesterday at Expo West, where she's so inspiring. It's a BIPOC-owned business. She's trying to reduce the cost for companies to decarbonize. It's such a wonderful way to really bring the private sector into this space in a way that is efficient, that is effective, and that brings everyone to the table. It's that moonshot that we've been talking about. It's how we get to the next level. How do we help companies that are not just mission-led, but that want to make a difference, get there? And that's what's really exciting to me. So there are all these kinds of innovations that I think need more support. But I just wanted to give another shout out to Planet Forward.
Yeah, a very important organization. Fatima, I want to ask you a little bit about the UAE. Governments play such huge roles in dealing with revolutionizing the ag tech industry and also helping reduce food scarcity. When your country looks at this, what do you believe is working in helping in that reduction?
I think, the UAE, the impact on food security has been really a major concern for us. We are a country that imports over 90% of our food, which makes us quite food secure in the sense, but also makes us very vulnerable to supply chain disruptions. And I think we all saw that during COVID. And that was one of the main reasons why we've really trying to enforce and practice here growing food locally. What can we grow? What makes sense to grow in the UAE through the use of technology? And we're seeing a lot of efforts go into AI and drone and satellite methods to monitor crop production. We're seeing so much aquaculture RAS system. So there is really this huge investments that's going into in the UAE to produce food through the use of technology and innovation, because we know that we're not a country that can produce food through the traditional methods. And I think what's also important is that how can we, when we have these new technologies come into a market that is so new, how can we scale up these technologies to make them more commercially viable and sustainable as well?
And, Fatima, when you look at the Middle East across the board, from Israel to the Arab nations, so much of water is actually subsidized by the government. Some people say sort of anti-competitive. So what happens is the government is helping the people pay for these things, but the problem is they're never really paying for the real cost. Do you think that policy needs to change in the approach to water?
I think there's always more areas of improvement that we can do in terms of water. I think, as a water scarce country, through partnerships and collaboration with other organizations and even within the UAE, there is a lot that we can do to improve. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Room for improvement. There's a question here from Firdas Intaj. I'm going to send this to Secretary Bernat. How much can the world food system be affected by the current instability in world economy and inflation?
I think, in terms of the world economy, and we look at inflation, there's a significant impact that can happen. We're seeing it every day through multiple sectors. One thing that we do feel very confident about here in the United States is, we know that we're able to produce enough food to feed folks here in the United States, but then we're an international system, so we have to be very cognizant of how we can help and support each other in our efforts. And I think that's why it's so important that when we launch important initiatives like Aim for Climate and the SPG Coalition, we're thinking from an international standpoint, even when we have to deal with these critical issues of inflation and we have trade implications, that we have an opportunity to invest together and we have an opportunity to work together to ensure that we can produce enough food to feed the world, hopefully affordably, but we also can look out for our climate at the same time. So again, continuing to work together, to plan together, I think it's our best overall strategy for being able to tackle these issues that are not only in any one country, they're affecting the entire world.
I want to thank you very much. It was an engaging conversation. I have so many more questions I want to ask you, but I'm told we need to wrap it up. I want to thank you, Dr. Jewel Bernat, U.S. Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, Danny Nierenberg, President of Food Tank, and of course, Fatima Al-Mulad, Director of Partnerships and Special Projects at the United Arab Emirates Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. I'm so grateful to have all of you guys here, and a big thanks especially to the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates in Washington for supporting this event, and also the previous two events in the series, Farmers on the Front of Climate Change and Water Scarcity and Climate Change. These are two previous events. You can watch the full recording of the conversation on FP's event page, foreignpolicy.com/events. You can also catch this whole entire panel if you missed any of it on there as well. There's going to be a lot more to come from Foreign Policy this month. We're going to have an event on Wednesday, March 23rd. It's called Towards Zero Emissions. That'll be also a fascinating event you can subscribe to. It's Towards Zero Emissions Power, a virtual dialogue exploring approaches to achieving a zero carbon electricity mix and enhancing reliability in energy grids. That is available. And then finally, on April 27th and 28th. It'll be our second annual Climate Change Summit, which will include 2 days of high-level programming with global leaders, trailblazers. We're going to be working to translate climate commitments into action. So stay tuned and be sure to check out foreignpolicy.com/events where you can sign up and subscribe. Thank you to everyone, the team at Foreign Policy as well for putting together this panel, and to all of our panelists. Hope to see you back next week. Take care.